Hi everyone, so welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I would talk about all things virtual assessment centres. Because of COVID, a lot of the hiring process has moved online from interviews to assessment centres, and I think assessment centres are particularly interesting virtually because they differ much more than, I would say, traditional interviews, which I think stay relatively the same whether they're face-to-face or virtually. So I thought I would dedicate this video to some tips and tricks if you're about to do a virtual assessment centre or if you're in the process of getting a grad job or an internship and might do one relatively soon. So I've got experience both with more traditional assessment centres, and I've also recently completed a virtual one for a grad scheme which I managed to get, so I thought I would compile a few tips and tricks to help you guys if you're going through a similar process. Also, before I begin, my app that I recently launched is in the final for a competition and the public vote is open. It literally takes 2 seconds, so it would really mean a lot if you could vote for my app, UniMate. All the links are below, so yeah. Right, so onto the tips now. So I've separated this into about 10 different tips, stuff about before, during, and then after the assessment centre. So in terms of before, my first thing is, prep your equipment. Make sure everything is working, make sure your laptop is charged, make sure if you are going to share your screen, that your screen sharing function works. So a lot of time you're going to have to do a presentation or whatnot. So make sure your sharing screen feature works. For example, I know mine on Teams doesn't work too well, so if I were to do one on Teams, I would sort that out ASAP. So yeah, make sure your laptop is charged, you've got good quality camera. I know not everyone has the option of having perfect Wi-Fi or perfect tech, so for example, if you're sharing a household during your assessment centre, maybe ask your housemates or your family to not go on the Wi-Fi to make sure you don't lose connection, because you may miss out on some important things. So it's just ease of mind, make sure everything is working correctly before you begin. My second tip is good lighting. Lighting can mean so much. Obviously something you never have to think about in a real life assessment centre, but good lighting can make a lot of difference. If it's very dark, they might not be able to see your facial expressions, which can have an impact on what impression you give them during the assessment centre. So a really good tip is just make sure the light is in front of your face. So for example, for me, when I'm sat at my desk, usually my window's on my side, so I've got light on one half of my face. So what I did for my assessment centre is I kind of turned my desk ever so slightly, obviously turned it back right after, but at least during the interview I was kind of equal lighting, and it can really make a difference, especially if you have a bad camera quality. Lighting makes all the difference, so definitely make sure you've got good lighting. Right, so now moving on to the actual assessment centre. Obviously these are very different to in-person ones because you're all in this remote room. You don't have the stress of actually going somewhere. It's all from the comfort of your home. Your breaks you can do in the comfort of your home. So it does have a few benefits. A few kind of tips and tricks to think about. One, make sure you get there early. A similar thing would happen if you were in real life, but in this instance, you can get there early as well. So make sure, say it's on Zoom, you enter the room 5 minutes before you're meant to start. So if it's meant to start at 11, get there, at 10:55 latest. Similarly, if you have breaks throughout your assessment centre, which you tend to have, always make sure to be the first person back. So a lot of the time they say, okay, feel free to turn your camera off for 10 minutes and go for a break, have a walk, grab some water or whatnot. Then you're going to enter your room again and be the first person to switch your camera on. That just gives a really good impression, shows that you're eager and you're not afraid to take initiative. So that's another good tip to keep in mind. And the next thing is to ask loads of questions. So I know you tend to get the same advice for normal assessment centres, but I think for virtual ones it's even more important because they've got less to judge you on, right? So if you ask questions, instructive ones, it will, improve that impression they have on you, and you will stay at the back of their mind. So make sure you ask questions about the company and about the people who are speaking. So I think the two kind of methods that are good are, both with prior research. So mention something that you've read either on their LinkedIn or a new blog post they posted, or, pick up on something they say during the assessment centre. So a lot of the time they're going to talk about the company, their values, and if you can pick up on maybe something a bit more unique about what they're saying, so it shows that, you're really paying attention to what they're saying and not just kind of thinking about, your performance then. Okay, so my other tip during the assessment centre is to look kind of overly attentive and make sure to smile. When everything's in 2D, everything's a bit more flat. So you need to be a bit more over the top than you would be in real life. Similarly, if you were filming a video. So, smile, engage, nod. They can only see this much of you. So make sure this much of you is super, super engaging, because you can tell if someone's drifting off or not paying attention. It's much more obvious when, they've only got the screens and your faces to look at versus, being in a room. So it's more easily to be scrutinized. So just make sure during that time you're super engaged, and you're smiling, eye contact and nodding, because that will give an even better impression of you. Another thing that I found quite, not intimidating, but very different in terms of a real life assessment centre, is that you're kind of always being watched. So a lot of the time you've got an exercise to do as a group, so you'll be sent on in a breakout room, for example, and there'll be someone there kind of watching you, and their camera won't be on, so you won't have the impression they're watching you, but they are. So I think something to always keep in mind is you're kind of constantly being watched. So just not overthink every move you do and say, but just bear that in mind when you're kind of doing group work and engaging with other people, because they might pick up on stuff that you haven't maybe intended them to. So just, again, bear that in mind. Another tip as well is make the most of the fact that it is virtual and you have access to, maybe a second screen where you can put some notes or some questions. So yeah, just because it's an assessment centre doesn't mean you need to abide by the traditional rules of, oh, I can't Google this thing. If anything, not taking something from the internet, but say you're given a task and you're bringing in a few like stats or whatever, they're gonna appreciate that, and it's showing kind of you're taking initiative. But similarly, if you prep loads of questions, you can have those all on your screens, or take notes during their presentation and whatnot. So make the most of the fact that you've got access to all these, either a different screen or access to the internet, and you can use that to your advantage during this virtual assessment centre. I don't remember what tip I'm on now, but we're just gonna keep going with it. So my next tip, and this really much applied to me, is even if you think you didn't do well, that doesn't mean you didn't do well. I think a lot of the time you focus on the task too much, and I was like, the topic we chose as a group was awful, and the presentation wasn't ideal, but a lot of the time they don't care about the content. They care more about how you work, and how you interact and your way of thinking and your problem solving process. So very much the point of an assessment centre is to see kind of, how you work and how you work with other people. So don't get too fixated on the task at hand, but more think about, okay, how am I presenting myself and how am I working with other people on my team? And that will set you, in a much better place than people that are just determined to present a really nice presentation. So my last tip about, the in-person experience is to, even after everything I said, just be yourself. At the end of the day, the assessment centre is to kind of see if you're a good fit for the company. At this point, you've gotten through all the CV stages, maybe an initial interview, maybe a second interview, and this is really much to see how you work. Is it similar to how other people work in the company? Are you going to get on with other people in the company? And it's just kind of seeing your way of working and to see if you fit, kind of cultural fit is what they call it. So don't stress too much about the details, but just be yourself. And if you don't get the assessment centre and if you don't get through, well, it means maybe you weren't a good fit for the company and there's a better company out there for you. So yeah. So my last two tips are about after the assessment centre. So don't think that the second you turn your Zoom camera off, that's it. I think a really good thing to do is always thank the people who helped the assessment centre, and just tell them, it was lovely to meet you earlier, thank you so much for learning about the company, I look forward to hearing back, sort of thing. Again, this will set you apart compared to the other candidates who may not have sent an email through, and show that you're really interested in this role. So always email the people who hosted the assessment centre or the person that you were in communication with, because that presents you really well. Another thing to do, and again, I don't know if this applies to every instance, but I think it's really good to add people on LinkedIn. So similarly as sending an email, it's always good to connect with people, because even if you don't get the job, there might be other opportunities. But similarly to the email, if you add someone on LinkedIn, it again shows with a little note being like, it was really lovely to meet you, thank you so much for the assessment centre. Again, it makes you stand out, and they will remember you when they are deciding who to hire. Right, so those are all my tips and tricks for virtual assessment centres. I hope that was helpful.